Seoul stands as an economic powerhouse on its own. Combined with neighboring areas, it is amongst the biggest metropolitan economies in the world, even larger than Shanghai, Beijing, Sydney, and Moscow. It is home to international conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, LG Electronics, and Kia Motors. Yet there is something rotten in South Korea. Birth rates are plummeting faster than anywhere else on the planet. In fact, the situation is so uniquely bad that South Korea has been breaking its own low record year after year. In 2023, the number of newborns was 230,000, which is a decrease of 7.7% from a year earlier. As such, South Korea's current fertility rate sits at 0.72, nowhere near the replacement level of 2.1 needed for a nation to replace itself from one generation to the next. This number is the bedrock of any functioning society. If it's higher, the population grows. If it's lower, the population and its culture die. The lower the number, the faster the death. So, in spite of its resounding economic success, South Korea is in fact going extinct. The country's 51 million population is on track to halve by the end of the century. The government has been slow to accept the depth and complexity of the crisis, but it has come around. There is a plan in motion to bring back the nuclear family, but it wants to do it in a different environment than Seoul. Some 120 kilometers south, a brand new city called Sejong is being built. In a few years, it will replace Seoul as the capital of South Korea, and in doing so, Korean lawmakers hope to reinvent a more family-oriented society. But how will this new city develop and grow? Could this be a template for Western societies? And what could the future hold if Korea doesn't get this plan right? One thing we do know, wealth alone cannot cradle the future. I have been fortunate to have found something meaningful in my line of work. However, most people have not. Still, you can always turn things around. If you are looking for a fulfilling career that makes a difference in the world, I strongly recommend checking out 80,000 Hours, the sponsor of this video. What they offer is absolutely free. 80,000 Hours is a non-profit that provides free advice to help people find fulfilling careers and tackle the world's most important and pressing problems. 80,000 hours is the typical amount of time someone spends working over a lifetime. 40 hours per week, 50 weeks per year for 40 years. That is a lot of time. And so, your career is a major driver of your happiness, but also an opportunity to impact the world positively. The nonprofit has conducted over 10 years of research alongside academics at Oxford University into how to find a fulfilling career that does a lot of good. 3 things I like about all this. It's based on verifiable research, it looks to make a positive impact globally, and it's totally free. Go to 80,000hours.org/Caspian and get a free copy of their in-depth career guide. Next, make a plan based on everything you've learned and put it into action. You've got nothing to lose by signing up, it's free. The nonprofit is funded by individual donors and philanthropic foundations without corporate sponsorship or advertising fees. So make use of that. The year is 1998. The internet is going mainstream. Cell phones are shrinking in size. Microsoft is introducing its new operating system. Google is making its debut. And South Korea is riding a tidal wave of success. Its GDP has finally broken through the middle income trap, and there is no stopping it. Over the next few years, South Korea's economy developed at breakneck speed to become one of the largest in the world, eclipsing $1 trillion in 2006 and landing on its current $1.6 trillion footing. While going through an economic boom, the South Korean population was going through a boom of its own. Having around 20 million citizens in 1950, it doubled to 40 million by 1983 and then ballooned to 51 million by 2016. However, as its economy and population grew, fertility rates went down steadily, coalescing just around the time when living standards improved. For South Korea, this revolutionary transition was more than just economic and demographic, it was cultural. A growing part of Korean society chose a child-free life. Admittedly, falling birth rates are seen in all developed countries, but none in such a drastic way as South Korea. The current birth rate of 0.72 might not sound too bad, but hear how it plays out across a few generations if left unchecked. Imagine a population of 100 people, let's say 50 couples, who then have only 40 children to replace them, based on the South Korean birth rate. Those children then have around 16 offspring of their own, who would then have only 6 children later on. So, in just 4 generations, a population of 100 is reduced to just 6. That is a decline of 94% in 4 generations. Projections for South Korea are looking grim. If birth rates remain at a record low pace, the country's population will drop to 24 million, the same level as seen in 1958. This time, however, the composition of its society will be completely different. While in 1958 the median age was 18 and currently is 45, by 2100 South Korea will have a median age of 59. It will become a nation of seniors. The consequences will be severe. For a functioning society, there must be enough people of working age. Citizens between the ages of 25 and 64 contribute the most to an economy, while those above generate the most healthcare costs. For much of history, the population pyramid resembled, well, a pyramid. Young people took care of the old, and could do so because they belonged to a demographic pool that was larger than the old. Nevertheless, as healthcare improved and people lived longer, the population pyramid started to resemble an urn. In the coming decades, that urn will steadily change into a reversed pyramid. In many developed countries, most citizens will be older than 60. However, a society with a reversed population pyramid will see an unsustainable financial burden on its workforce. Even the wealthiest countries will struggle. People will have to work longer to keep up with increasing healthcare costs. Technology helps soften the blow, but it can't fix an endemic crisis like plummeting birth rates, certainly not in a case as extreme as South Korea. Record low birth rates will affect the country in every way imaginable. South Korea's economy, pension system, and security will be placed under severe stress. Crashing birth rates are observed in all developed nations, and so far, no country has successfully improved the situation. Seemingly, the fertility crisis is endemic and deeply rooted in culture, so much so that we simply don't know what works. In South Korea, successive governments have thrown money at the problem. In the past 20 years, more than $286 billion have been invested in social programs meant to encourage nuclear families, which is the traditional family unit in most cultures. Unfortunately, South Korea's social programs have not worked as intended. Year after year, the country has eclipsed its own low fertility rate record. Part of the problem is the way South Korea grew in the 1980s, especially its capital, Seoul. Nearly half the South Korean population lives on just 12% of its territory, mainly around the capital and its vicinity. Seoul is where most opportunities are, so people stay nearby. Unfortunately, packing millions of people in a close urban environment creates pressure on infrastructure and resources. As a result, underneath its high-tech glamour and K-pop branding, Seoul has become a rat race for those who live there. Horrendous traffic and poor air quality have stretched public services to their limits, and housing has become increasingly unaffordable. Not surprisingly, Seoul's birth rate is the lowest in the country, sitting as low as 0.55 children per woman. That's about 30% lower than the rest of the country's already record low statistics. What's more, since Seoul's urbanization is set to continue unabated, the situation is bound to get worse. South Korea is already the most expensive country in which to raise a child. Private tuition and childcare costs are high. Raising a child from birth to the age of 18 costs more than 7.7 times the GDP per capita, the highest rate in the world. For comparison, in Germany and France, raising a child costs 3.6 and 2.2 times the GDP per capita, respectively. South Korea is in a league of its own. Part of the problem is the cost of living in Seoul. An average-sized apartment costs over $740,000, which is beyond the reach of most, even by wealthy Korean standards. However, this housing complication also presents an unlikely solution. While culture is dynamic and tends to change organically over time, infrastructure and housing are tangible problems that the government can solve. Reforming Seoul is too complicated. It is essentially a corporate-run city. So, in 2003, as President Roh Moo-hyun took office, he designed a response strategy to the demographic collapse. Just 120 kilometers south of Seoul, a new city called Sejong was commissioned for construction. It would sit about in the middle of the country and would focus primarily on the settlement of nuclear families. Here it is in 2009, a construction site. And here it is today, just 15 years later. The government flattened out the landscape, laid down a grid system, and built hundreds of high-rise buildings, including schools, bridges, hospitals, and other public facilities and services. The Koreans plan to move their capital here. The government is relocating at least 36 ministries and agencies to Sejong. The city currently has a population of about 300,000, but upon its completion in 2030, some 500,000 people will call Sejong their home. At least that's the plan. As of now, Sejong has its own financial and business district, and there are plans for a new industrial zone nearby. Everything in Sejong is on the technological cutting edge. On every street are touchscreens, QR codes, and digital information boards. The city was specifically designed this way to allow for self-driving cars and complete automation in the near future. The entire enterprise is powered by renewable energy with a focus on green spaces. There's even an artificial beach. Just as important, Sejong is all about family planning. It is bustling with parks and playgrounds for children. There are plenty of elementary schools and affordable kindergartens, making it a suitable place to raise a family. Being able to design a city from scratch has its ups, since everything can be planned accordingly. For one, housing is more affordable in Sejong. Even though it is 120 kilometers away from the capital, a medium-sized apartment in Sejong costs almost half as much as it would in Seoul, $390,000 versus $740,000 to be precise. For a newly starting family, that price drop makes all the difference. The results speak for themselves. With a birth rate of 0.97, more children have been born in Sejong than anywhere else in South Korea for the past 3 years. That still falls short of the replacement level of 2.1, but it makes Sejong an exception in South Korea nonetheless. It shows that the population decline is reversible, and so by moving its capital city, South Korea may yet steer away from extinction. Sejong isn't complete yet, but it's already yielding positive outcomes. Much of its success is owed to its urban planning and generous social welfare system. Since its development as South Korea's new capital, Sejong has mostly seen government officials and civil servants move in, all of whom benefit from generous social programs. Government employees are relatively free to take childcare leave, extending up to 3 years of leave per child on top of the maternity leave. There is also no corporate pressure since government jobs are less competitive and civil servants are guaranteed they can come back to work after having children. In Seoul, the situation is nearly the opposite. In the private sector, Koreans often avoid taking extended childcare leave because they worry about potential workplace disadvantages from their management. So, stable jobs and affordable housing encourage people to have more babies. Sejong proves that this formula works. According to official data from 2016, 32.7 babies were born per 1,000 government officials, which is more than double the 14.5 babies born per 1,000 private sector citizens of similar age in the same year. But the government didn't quite think of everything when planning for Sejong. If it had, its birth rate would have been even higher. Vast numbers of government employees whose jobs have relocated to Sejong haven't gone with them. Instead, most are continuing to live in Seoul, making multi-hour daily commutes to the new capital. Many say the new city lacks culture, or in other words, it's soulless. Additionally, transportation in Sejong is lacking. Despite planning the city from the ground up, Korean developers made an irredeemable mistake. They left out a transit system. Sejong has no transportation network to speak of. The city has no underground train or tram network. How could this oversight have happened? We don't know. However, as a result, nearly all journeys in Sejong are done by personal motor vehicles. The city has public buses, but they are few in number. Only 7% of Sejong's transportation is done by bus. Meanwhile, cars account for 41% of transportation, which is twice as much as in Seoul. Simply put, in Sejong, if you don't own a car, you don't get to work. This infrastructure oversight somewhat defeats the purpose of affordable housing. Newly starting families struggle to find financial benefits in Sejong that make moving there worthwhile. So, it's not quite the green, affordable, cutting-edge city as advertised. And this infrastructure flaw might just be a deal breaker for the demographic that the developers are looking to attract. Still, Korean lawmakers have their hopes pinned on Sejong. Its policy is driven less by choice and more by necessity. The state needs to fix its demographic crisis. None of its economic success will matter if it cannot replace its population from one generation to the next. Sejong illustrates that the demographic collapse is reversible. However, for the plan to work, the government needs to redouble its social programs and address the shortcomings of the local infrastructure. Otherwise, its plan, Sejong, is but a ghost town in the making. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you like what we do and you want to show some support, you can leave a super thanks in the comments section. All donations help make the channel independent and self-sustainable. In any case, thank you for your time and Seoul.